There's many different games out there. We all have our favourites and titles we remember fondly. But sometimes a game series that we've seen or heard about but never actually played. That was my experience with Monster Hunter. I'd heard about it and it looked quite interesting, but I'd never given the games a shot. This past month, however, I decided to try Monster Hunter World as a new player and see what this series was all about. And let's just say one thing off the bat, I did get quite hooked. So let's start off with talking about some of the intro of the game. So you begin creating your character, and the level of customization and the graphics in Monster Hunter World, I'd say, are pretty good and should satisfy most people. One thing that's worth mentioning to everyone is that you start off choosing your armor at the beginning and you get a couple of choices. One thing I would definitely say is to avoid using the Guardian armor. It's intended to power you through the game, the base game, and try to get you to the expansion as quick as possible, and you basically, as you level up, the stats of the armor level up with you. So if you do use that, then you sort of lose a lot of the challenge and thereby fun of the game, I'd say. So definitely choose the leather armor or the mail armor to begin the game with, and I started off with the leather armor myself. You also choose a cat-like pet as a companion, which threw me off guard a bit.
Cajitas wares, if you have coin.
So initially I didn't see much point of the cat companion and thought maybe it was just a cute mascot for the game that would accompany you around the world, but it turned out the cat, or Palico as it's called in game, would really help out with distraction during combat or some clutch heals during certain fights. Once you're done creating your character and going through a short intro sequence, you then land on an island which will be pretty much your central hub for the game. This is where you are able to make new weapons and armor, eat food to gain buffs, and complete quests. After arriving, I started off by thinking which weapon I was going to use and messed around in the training area until I found something I quite liked. There's 14 different weapon types you can choose from in the game, and you begin with the basic version of each, allowing you to choose which playstyle you'd like right from the start. There are 11 melee weapons and 3 ranged weapons. So I'll give you a quick little rundown on a few of the different weapon types. Some examples would be the hammer, a short-range blunt weapon that's quite satisfying to bonk monsters on the head with. We also have the longsword that has a bit more range and is more agile, with a counterattack mechanic built in if you can time it right, and it can be very satisfying when you land those counters. Then we have the switch axe, which is one of the 2 different weapons in the game that have a morph mechanic. 2 forms are an axe that is the default form and allows for more mobility and a decent amount of damage, or the more powerful sword form that sacrifices mobility but can dish out some serious damage and has a certain amount of time before you need to morph back into the axe form. This meter you can see in the top left of the screen. We also have the bow, allowing the player to keep monsters at range, fire arrows while moving, and still offering a decent bit of mobility. Another unique weapon would be the insect glaive. This allows for the player to leap into the sky, offering a gameplay style with more verticality to mount monsters and giving a great deal of mobility. And it's just a cool weapon you don't see in many games.
It's like spinning Tarzan Jiu-Jitsu!
For myself, I went with the longsword. I quite enjoyed the different combos you could do with this weapon, and I suppose the balance between damage and speed, and also the sort of range of the longsword. And I don't know, maybe there's a bit of weeb in me or something.
NANI?!
So the game has a quest or mission system. You accept an assignment on hunting or capturing a monster and then go out into the field to aim to complete whatever that is. And obviously there's many different environments you'll come across during your playthrough, with their own types of creatures and maybe even their own mechanics that you need to prepare for, like an area that is extremely hot or cold, for example. And of course, as you go from mission to mission, you'll gradually make your way through the game's main story. Being honest, when I first booted up Monster Hunter to give the game a try, I wasn't even sure if I completely liked the combat. It felt quite different to other action games, I'd say. There's a weight to each attack, and you have to be more deliberate with when you go in to engage a monster and pick your openings. And when I started, it just felt, I don't know, like perhaps a bit sluggish and a little bit awkward. Perhaps that's the right word. But yeah, it just didn't feel quite right to me when I first started. But as I kept playing and I gave the game a couple of more hours, it really started to click, and I actually started to really like the combat and understand it better. So I'd probably chalk it up to just because it felt quite different. You know, the closest thing to it is probably something like Dark Souls, but even then I wouldn't say it feels the same as Dark Souls in terms of combat. It definitely doesn't, but it would be probably the closest cousin to it. So the reason I bring this up is to say to you that if you do try Monster Hunter and the combat does feel a bit weird to you to begin with, I would strongly suggest you give the game at least a couple of hours with the combat, and also obviously experiment with the weapons, the different variety of weapons that you can use, and try to see, you know, if one of them fits you better than another. And you can use the training area, which I highlighted earlier in this video, to try out the different weapons and get a sense of the flow of each one of them and which one, you know, fits you best. So yeah, once I gave the combat a chance for a couple of hours, as I mentioned, things really started to click. I've heard it's a common thought through some people when they first try the game, that the combat maybe feels a bit off, but you really start to enjoy it after a bit of time and begin to understand the mechanics of the combat on a bit of a deeper level and why they are the way they are. I also really enjoyed how you need to track monsters on the field when you go out onto a mission. If it's a mission where you're hunting a creature you've never seen before, you have to look for clues, whether that be feathers from the monster or its scent or footprints that you might come across, and you slowly start to track the monster and where it might be within the field. Every creature has its own habitat and routine. They might hunt other monsters for food, go to sleep at certain times, and even have turf wars with another monster if one comes into another's home area, which can be quite a spectacle when it happens. Each weapon also has a sharpening mechanic. As you progress through the game, you'll unlock weapons with higher levels of sharpness, and your blade will get blunt at a slower pace. These mechanics help to add an extra sense of immersion to the game, I think, when you're out hunting for a monster. And it just looks really cool when you're in combat and you have to, like, you know, hunt down a monster and you're sharpening your blade in between parts of the battle. Yeah, I just really like that element. So overall, the flow of the game tends to be to accept a mission at the town, prepare yourself via items and food before you leave and enter into the field. You then may have several assignments to do on your mission. For example, it could be, you know, hunt 3 different monsters. It could be you have to collect a certain amount of items out in the fields, scavenge, and then capture a certain monster to bring back to the town for part of the story. And after slaying a monster, they'll drop materials that you can scavenge from their body, and then you use those items to gradually create new armors and weapons. So when you're back in town, you can speak to the blacksmith and you start to potentially build several pieces of armor set, for example, which, you know, can give you different buffs, like fire resistance as one. This allows you then to use these different pieces of gear for different situations on the field. And say, you know, a monster does ice attacks, you would then have a gear set potentially to combat that and to stop that weakness that you might have. Oh, and also when you fight monsters, where you choose to strike on the body of a monster is quite important. So say you're using a longsword, you can go for the tail to slice it off. If you're using a hammer, blunt weapons are great at stunning a monster on the head. Capcom did a pretty good job, I'd say, in designing each creature so that it feels different, has different unique mechanics. And say you're playing with a group of people, you can focus on different parts of the body of the monster. But speaking about multiplayer, that is definitely one thing I criticize the game on.
But we're supposed to be friends forever.
It does exist, and you can play with your friends, but if you're going through the story together, each one of you will have to accept the next story mission solo first. You go out into the field by yourselves, watch the cutscene if there is one, and then after you've hunted down the monster, watch potentially 2 cutscenes. You then will be able to leave your part of the game and then accept your friend's invite request. Join their game and then go out in the field again to then fight the monster together. And say you're playing with 3 people or 4 people co-op, all of you have to then do this separately, which is a bit of a pain and doesn't feel very fluid at all. If you're looking to do missions that aren't part of the story though, and are in a similar place in the game, you should be able to join these with friends immediately, and they should just, be easy to jump in and jump out of. So all in all, you can play with friends through Monster Hunter World as a first playthrough, but there'll just be some loopholes you will have to jump through. Hopefully they make multiplayer a much smoother process in the next game, which is Monster Hunter Wilds, coming out next year, I believe. As they did improve the multiplayer experience in the game after this one, which was Rise. So that's a good sign. Overall, what are my thoughts? I would definitely recommend giving Monster Hunter World a try if you haven't already, and even for people that may have given the game an hour or 2 and dipped out thinking the combat wasn't for them, I suggest you give it a bit more time and it might click with you as it did with me. It's also a really good time to jump into Monster Hunter right now, as World has a lot of content to play through and the expansion is highly praised by players, and we have the new game on the horizon coming out next year. I hope this video helps anyone that was interested in the game. I didn't want to run too long, so I think we'll stop here. If you've played Monster Hunter before, let me know your thoughts on the game or the series as a whole in the comments. Did you enjoy playing? What's your favourite weapon? And what do you think about the series overall? Thanks so much guys for watching. I've just started with YouTube, so going to try and up the quality with each video. I really do appreciate it if you've stuck around until the end, and I'll see you in the next one.